The Game of Silence by Louise Erdrich. Illustrated by Paolo Domeniconi. Omakayas is an Ojibwe girl who lives with her family on Lake Superior. It is 1850, and members of a neighboring tribe have just recently arrived after being forced from their land. They have traveled a long way, and they are tired, hungry, and raggedy. Omakayas and her brother are at home with their grandmother, Nokomis. They begin to play a silent game while they wait for others to arrive so the adults can discuss what is happening to their people. Words, words, words. Pressing up from her stomach, trembling on her lips. Words, buzzing in her throat like caught bees, banging in her head. Harsh words, angry words, sounds boiling up in her like sap, wild things she couldn't let out. Yow! A kick from her brother almost caused Omakayas to blurt an exclamation. No. Omakayas sealed her lips together in a firm line and glared at her brother with all of the force pent up inside. If the fire from her eyes could scorch him, Pinch would be the first to yell out. Then he would lose the game of silence. But Pinch was used to receiving furious looks from his family. He knew just how to respond. First, he looked innocently at Omakayas, as though he was ever innocent. He pretended he was unaware of the raging energy stuffed up inside of his sister. Then, as Omakayas bored her eyes at him with increasing intensity, he lolled out his tongue and twisted his face into a deranged and awful mask. His features shifted into one ugly and absurd face after the next, until suddenly Omakayas almost laughed. Just in time, she clapped her hand to her mouth, closed her eyes, concentrated. Yes. Aya. She would be a stone. Asinig. A pile of stones, each one harder and quieter than the next. She would be silent and more silent yet. And in spite of her annoying brother, she would win. She kept her eyes closed, put her forehead on her knees, thought, stone, 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 asin, asin. Filled her mind with the sound of falling rain, which was easy. Outside, it was not just raining, but pouring down, a drenching, cold, miserable, early summer shower. The rain had lasted for days, since the raggedy ones arrived. That was another thing. Besides Pinch, Omakayas couldn't stand rain anymore. The water made mush of tender new ground around her family's birch bark house. Droplets hissed through the roof vent into the fire, driving stinging smoke into her eyes. Everyone around her was affected. Nokomis's old bones ached, and she creaked like a tree every time she moved. The watery wind sent coughs racking through her mother's chest. It was too wet to play outside, and cold when it should have been warm. Worst of all, Omakayas was stuck with Pinch. He nudged her. Omakayas almost slugged him in return, but controlled herself. She'd had enough of him to last her whole life. She opened her eyes a fraction, then her eyes went wide in shock. Somehow, Pinch had got hold of her beloved doll, and he was making it teeter on the cliff of his knees. Omakayas bit her lips so hard it hurt. Pinch walked her doll to the edge of his knees, then teasingly back. If only Mama was here. If only she would return. Nokomis concentrated on her work so hard it was impossible to distract her. Omakayas pretended to shut her eyes again, but cleverly watched until just the right moment to snatch back her doll. She sighed as though she was falling asleep, and then, with a flash, she grabbed. Taken by surprise, Pinch couldn't react quickly enough to hold on, and Omakayas triumphantly clutched her doll. She stuck it down the neck of her dress. There, safe. Inside, she laughed, but she didn't make a single sound. Not a chirp, not so much as a mouse's squeak. She was going to win the game of silence. She just knew it. Pinch was now poking little twigs into the fire in the center of the fire pit, watching them burn. Omakayas tried not to notice him, but his head was so big and fuzzy. Pinch's hair sprang out with its own energy. Crafty eyes in his rough, round face calculated his sister's endurance. He was surely cooking up some mischief. Sure enough, Pinch drew the burning wand from the fire and laid it innocently next to her ankle, as though she didn't know that it would scorch her if she moved the slightest inch, and make her cry out, first, and instantly lose the game. She kicked it back at him. "Gago, Pinch," she nearly warned, but bit her lip. "Aya, aya, aya," he mouthed the taunt, making an impossibly irritating face that almost broke Omakayas' discipline. Luckily, just at the second that Omakayas decided to forfeit the game and to smash her little brother over the head with a big tin soup ladle, the visitors arrived. "They are here," said their grandmother. "You can quit the game until after we eat." "Ag!" Omakayas exploded with such a wild sound of rage that Nokomis jumped. Pinch retreated, unnerved by how sorely he'd tested his sister. Omakayas breathed out in relief. These visitors were her friends and cousins, Twilight, Little Bee, and Two-Strike Girl. They had brought the boy she called, in her mind, the angry one. Her cousins were her favorite friends, the ones she counted on. Twilight was much like her name, quiet and thoughtful. Little Bee was funny and bold. Two-Strike was tough, and she could do anything a boy could do, usually better. Since her mother had died, she was wilder than ever. Even her father had not been able to handle Two-Strike, and had left her with Auntie Muskrat. But Auntie Muskrat had had no success in taming Two-Strike. Sometimes she was so fierce that she outdid everyone. It was a challenge to play with her. The girls had learned to sew and bead together, gathered berries, and helped their mothers clean fish. They also learned early on how to tan hides, a task that Omakayas despised. And now, too, her sister, Angeline, was home. Omakayas grinned with satisfaction. Pinch was delightfully outnumbered by girls and would pout, creeping to Mama's side when she arrived and turning into a baby, hoping to be pampered with tidbits of meat and maple sugar. Now everyone, the children and their parents, squeezed into the lodge. They had made the lodge extra big that summer for visitors. For the first time, it was packed entirely full, but there was enough room for everyone. Even the angry one found a space to sit. He glared from a little spot against the wall. Together, they ate rich venison soup from the shallow birch bark makacoon they'd brought along with them. Two other men squeezed in, important men. Old Tallow entered, huge and rangy and smelling of wolf. She settled herself, while outside her ferocious dog stood guard, unmoving and alert even in the pelting rain. Each of Old Tallow's feet seemed to take up as much space as a small child, but Omakayas didn't mind. Warily, but completely, she loved the fierce old woman. Each visitor brought a gift for the pile that the children who won the game of silence would choose from that night, for it was an important night. With the raggedy ones came serious doings, difficult questions, and impossible news. Great attention was needed. The grown-ups needed to counsel, think, absorb the facts, without having to shush small children. The children could tell how important the meeting was from the degree to which their silence was required. The pile of treats was the best ever. There was a bag of marbles, some of actual glass, not just clay. A pair of narrow moccasin that Omakayas thought just might fit her. One doll, elaborately dressed in a tiny set of breeches and a leather coat. A sharp knife. A deer knuckle game. 2 duck's bills of maple sugar tied together with split jackpine root. 6 red ribbons. A little roll of flowered cloth. 8 tiny bells. 1 small bow and 6 arrows tipped with real brass points cut from a trade kettle. The arrows were fletched with the sharp black and yellow feathers of a bird that the island where they lived was named for, the golden-breasted woodpecker. Old Tallow must have brought them. What treasures! The children examined them breathlessly, each picking out one particular prize they meant to win. Little Bee, of course, wanted the doll. Two-Strike Girl, the bow and arrows. Pinch coveted the knife, but he was torn by greed for the maple sugar and the need for marbles to replace those he'd lost. The angry one did not deign to move from his spot or look at the gifts. No doubt he'd have no problem winning the game. As for Twilight, quiet and serene, she had no trouble playing the game, and she would be content with anything. Omakayas wanted the ribbons, the bells, and the marbles too, but she settled on the moccasin because she had watched her grandmother make them so carefully. They were fancy, with velvet ankle cuffs, the tops beaded with flowers and little white sparkling vines. Worth her silence. Now the grown-ups were ready to start talking. Nokomis sang the song of the game of silence 4 times, nearly catching Pinch at the end. Then she turned away from them too, absorbed in the talk. Omakayas looked longingly at Twilight, and her cousin made a sad and frustrated face. With her favorite cousin so close, and her annoying brothers so near, it was difficult to play. If only they could talk. At first, the girls communicated by mouthing words and moving their eyes, but the temptation to laugh was too great. They turned away from each other unwillingly. Omakayas listened to the rain, a solid drumming and hissing. Then she listened to the fire crackling and sighing. She watched the beautiful and changing glow of the coals. At some point, Omakayas couldn't tell exactly when, her attention was caught by something her father said. And then she noticed that her cousin Twilight was also listening to the grown-ups' conversation. Soon, they all couldn't help but listen. They leaned forward, straining to hear every sound, almost forgetting to breathe. That night, for the first time, everybody got their prizes. Nobody lost the game of silence. For that night, they knew the threat of a much bigger loss. They would all fear to lose something huge, something so important that they never even knew that they had it in the first place. Who questions the earth, the ground beneath your feet? They had always accepted it, always here, always solid. That something was home.